You know, one of the greatest stories of reconciliation in modern times is the story of the healing that took place in Rwanda, the African country of Rwanda, about 25 years ago. So, a while before all of you were born, but your parents probably remember this. Rwanda was the center of a massive slaughter and bloodshed. In that country, there are two social groups that have existed for a long time, the Hutu and the Tutsi. Now, they had lived in relative peace for quite a while, but in 1994, the Hutu leaders secretly planned to and then carried out a massive attempt to slaughter and wipe out all of the Tutsi completely, genocide. And over the course of about 100 days, about 500,000 Tutsi women, men, and children were murdered, which constitutes about half of that whole group. And the genocide that was attempted by a huge portion of the Hutu population. These weren't outsiders. These people were murdered by their next door neighbors, their coworkers, the people they saw in the grocery store, the people whose kids played soccer with their kids. Now, when order was restored, about 100,000 Hutu men and women were arrested for murder. This created a major problem for the country. How do you try and convict 100,000 people at once? I mean, it would have taken 100 years for them to complete all of those trials. So the president at the time, President Kagame, took a very bold risk. He decided to pardon all of the Hutu who were willing to confess their crimes publicly. And since then, most of them have been released. Yet where did they go? They had to go right back into their homes, which were right next to the surviving Tutsi, all those that they had attempted to wipe out completely. So forgiveness and reconciliation became a cultural necessity for the people of Rwanda after that. Because if they didn't forgive, if the Tutsi had chosen to hold on to their grudges, then they would have eventually sought vengeance. And you probably would have just been a ticking time bomb until another massive slaughter occurred, but this time the Tutsi against the Hutu. And the church in Rwanda really led the way, paved the way for forgiveness and reconciliation by the preaching of the gospel. There's a wonderful book that's written about it called As We Forgive, Stories of Reconciliation in Rwanda. And it's a very difficult book to read because you can't read about the forgiveness without also reading about the incredible atrocities committed. But it's a beautiful book that shows how the gospel drives forgiveness and reconciliation. There was one interview in particular that really stood out to me. It was with a woman named Rosario, whose entire family was murdered by one man. And the interview asked her how she could forgive that one man. And then she said, "How can I refuse to forgive? I did not create this man. Even my family that he killed, I did not create them either. God created them. So I place everything into the hands of God." This woman shows incredible trust in God's rule over this world, which allowed her to forgive. And we actually see that in this story. We see that at the end of the story of Joseph, Jacob, Judah, and Jesus. Now remember, Joseph's brothers have come to him with this false story about Israel asking him to forgive them. And then look at what Joseph says in verse 19. "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God?" That's a very simple yet profound and important statement because it shows that trusting God's rule over this world is one of the major things that helped Joseph to forgive his brothers. You see, when someone sins against us and we're faced with the need to forgive them, if we refuse to forgive and instead choose to hold on to our grudge and maybe even seek revenge, we're actually trying to take the place of God, take his rule away from him. That's what we're really doing. If I choose not to forgive somebody but hold a grudge against them and hold bitterness in my heart, what I'm really saying to God is, "God, I know you've told me to forgive this person, but in this situation, I know what this person deserves and better than you do, so I'm going to hold on to my grudge against them." Holding a grudge and refusing to forgive is just putting ourselves in the place of God. It's us trying to act as if we have the right to judge that person and not trusting God to take care of it, not putting them in the hands of God, as Rosario put it. For example, if that other person is a Christian, and if we refuse to forgive them for a sin they've done against us, what we're saying to God is, God, I know that you punished them in Christ, that you punished that sin in Christ. Your wrath was poured out on that sin on Christ, and you're satisfied. But you know what, God, that punishment's not enough for me. I'm not satisfied. So I'm going to take their place and give them what they really deserve. Or if that person's not a Christian and never becomes a Christian, if we refuse to forgive them, we're basically saying to God, God, I know you have an eternity in hell coming for them, and that to you is satisfactory punishment. But for me, it's not. They deserve more, and I'm going to give it to them by my grudge or trying to seek revenge. Refusing to forgive is trying to take the place of God. And as Joseph put it in this story, in order to forgive, we have to trust God's rule. We have to trust his rule over this world, that he will rule it properly, that he will deal out whatever needs to be done to right that wrong. Now, that doesn't mean that if the person committed a crime against you, you do not report it. That does not mean that. If someone has done something to you that is a crime, you need to report it. And reporting it is actually doing what I'm saying here. That's actually trusting God, because what you're doing there is you're trusting the authorities that God put in place to handle the wrong. And then you are tasked only to forgive them from the heart. And of course, we can trust because of the cross. We know we can trust because of the cross of Jesus Christ. You can trust the God that not only rules this world, but suffered and bled for you, as Jesus did. What other proof do we need that we can trust his rule over this world? What other proof do we need other than Jesus' death and resurrection? Let him handle the rest. You forgive from your heart. You guys think about that, and I'll see you tomorrow.